Most of us have had a so-called déjà vu moment where for a brief instant we are convinced we have had that experience before. While a brain scientist might easily explain the phenomenon, there are some who believe that these moments are a glimpse into a previous life, and some have claimed that we accumulate baggage from these previous incarnations, which causes problems today. Here we look at a psychiatrist who did not believe in reincarnation, but found himself inadvertently regressing a patient whose anxiety disorders could be assisted in no other way. She was still carrying fears from a long series of lives where she was exposed to war, natural disasters, and other frightening events. In 1980, psychiatrist Brian Weiss was attended by a woman called Catherine for help with her anxiety, panic attacks, and phobias. Over the next 18 months, the doctor used tried and tested methods of therapy to assist her in overcoming her symptoms. When, after this time, they were having no effect in relieving her distress, he finally included in his treatment the use of hypnosis. This involved regressing Catherine to her childhood, at times to as young as 3 years, to uncover traumatic events that may have set up her anxiety triggers. However, nothing seemed to work, as her distressing symptoms stubbornly remained. Strangely, at one stage Catherine began to talk about scenarios that Weiss knew had not happened during her childhood. This was when he first realised that her trance state had taken her back to a past life, which was emerging as a causative factor of her condition. It should be noted that neither Weiss nor his patient had ever believed in reincarnation up to this point. Catherine, a 27-year-old laboratory assistant, had been raised a staunch Roman Catholic, while Weiss, a scientist by training and conservative by nature, mistrusted any ideas that could not be justified by rational empiricism. One thing that lent authenticity to Catherine's accounts of her past 86 lives in total was that she always seemed to have been an ordinary person. Whether male or female, she lived out her lives as a servant, maid, soldier, labourer, or some other underling, and was usually poor. But the clincher came for Weiss when, during one session, she disclosed astonishing knowledge of his own personal life, referring to things that she could not have possibly known about, and their spiritual meaning for him. Seemingly as a channel for another being, she described meeting his father and small child, Weiss's baby boy, both of whom had passed away. The being knew the name of his father, that Weiss had named his daughter after him, and the medical cause of both his and the baby's death. Having been initially sceptical of what he was uncovering, Weiss was overawed by these revelations, as Catherine knew next to nothing about his personal history. Another persuasive element was that Catherine had stored knowledge of expertise she had learned during her multiple incarnations, some of them possibly long-forgotten skills, such as those involved in herbalism and embalming bodies. She could give a detailed how-to on butter churning learnt in one life, while in another she had served as a World War II pilot, using in her accounts terminology that no ordinary modern person would know. However, it became clear that the whole point of repeatedly returning to the mortal plane was to garner spiritual learnings, lessons which would assist in her development as a higher being. Over the months of Catherine's therapy, Weiss realised that, of her many incarnations, only 6 or 7 were significant in providing this learning. During Catherine's therapy sessions, she would be regressed to a previous lifetime and describe the circumstances she was able to discern from some kind of remote viewing. These descriptions could be quite detailed, including that of her appearance, the people around her, the work she was doing, and clues about the era, such as her clothing, coin, or a building. They also included the events which impacted her, sometimes causing her life to end, and very probably the residual trauma that she seemed to carry in her subconscious. Very early in Catherine's therapy, she recalled one life from 1863 BC, in which she had drowned in a terrifying flood. Despite Weiss's concerns that the memory could worsen her anxiety, the following week she burst into his office with the news that her fear and nightmares of drowning had disappeared. In another life, she recalled having her throat slashed in battle, echoed centuries later by dread of suffocation when coming out of an anaesthetic. With this revelation and her increased awareness, Catherine's fear of choking also diminished. In yet another existence, she was cast out from her village as she had contracted a lethal skin disease, spending her final days sealed into a cave. This life seemed to be linked to her present-day fear of enclosed spaces. After 18 months of fruitless traditional psychotherapy, Catherine made astonishingly rapid progress with the use of past life regressions. A strange phenomenon developed in the pattern her consultations started to take. A surprising aspect of the therapy occurred when Weiss progressed Catherine to the end points of some of her lives. With the departure from her body, she experienced a sense of peace and freedom as she seemed to progress to a higher spiritual plane. Her conscious soul would leave her body, float upwards, and then be drawn to an energizing light, where she would wait for someone to come and help her. Often, eerily at first, Catherine would then start to speak in a different voice and with a new kind of authority. When resting between accounts of two lives, Catherine seemed to be able to channel messages from highly evolved spirits who called themselves masters. Weiss called these pauses in-between times, when Catherine's voice changed to a loud, husky and confident tone, which imparted knowledge and insights about the spiritual journey. These included revelations about stages in the astral plane and the repayment of karmic debt during earthly existence. On awakening, Catherine would remember details of the lives she had visited, but never the messages of the masters. An interesting aspect of her lifetime learnings was the apparent reincarnating of people in familiar groups. In her diverse lives, Catherine encountered her parents, friends, and current partner in varying roles as each tried to resolve lessons to be learnt together. It took just over 3 months of past life therapy for Catherine's cure to become complete. The anxiety and phobias, which had emotionally paralysed her since childhood, had disappeared, and she had become a happy person who now radiated an inner peace. Weiss also wondered if the actual process of realising that death was not a finality may too have also been part of the cure. Weiss was later able to verify elements of Catherine's accounts by looking through historical records. He went on to publish books on the healing power of past life therapy and has regressed more than 4,000 patients since his work with Catherine. It needs to be said that experts caution against trying past life regression by yourself. If you embark on this journey, make sure that you have a qualified practitioner to guide and assist you. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey.
Sometimes when a soul is about to incarnate or is about to be born, they're able to send a message to the family, which is usually the mother, by appearing in a dream or some other form of message, signalling to them that they will be shortly arriving. The famous researcher into reincarnation, the late Dr. Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia School of Medicine, called these messages announcing dreams. The following story is about a young soul who appeared before a mother 1 month before she was due to be born. Kira Angelica considered herself to be a spiritual person and was open-minded about most matters spiritual, so it came as no surprise to her when an unusual event happened to her one evening when she was 8 months pregnant. Kira was up late one night, sewing in her dining room, when she suddenly heard the voice of a young child calling to her from the kitchen. The young voice called out, "Mommy, Mommy!" So Kira immediately went to the kitchen, but found nobody there, and returned to the dining room and continued sewing. But again the young voice called out, "Mommy!" But this time the young voice was coming from the living room, and again when Kira went to see where the voice was, she found nobody there. Kira then returned to the dining room and continued sewing. A young mother would normally be unsettled by this unusual and unsettling experience, but because of her spiritual awareness, Kira somehow knew that this was her future child communicating with her. The disembodied child's voice then took a message to a new level when a few minutes later actually appeared to her mother. Kira looked up towards the kitchen door and saw a young girl about 10 years of age wearing a homemade plaid dress. They both smiled at each other, and then the girl slowly faded away. Again, Kira was not particularly disturbed by what she saw, but was actually quite elated, and knew that the young girl she had just seen was the child she would shortly give birth to. Kira figured that the plaid dress that the young girl was wearing was possibly something she'd worn in her previous life. Kira gave birth to a baby girl on September the 24th, 2010, and called her Dorothy. As time passed, Kira would find that Dorothy loved to entertain before she'd learned to utter a single word, and like most babies, was always jumping up and down in a cot, making everyone laugh. When Dorothy was only 3.5, she was in a musical with many other children at different ages, and showed a natural talent and stage presence, so much so that other parents started filming her. Dorothy loved to wear bright clothing and was talkative, bubbly, and a natural entertainer, and was extremely popular amongst other children. Dorothy's music teacher told Kira that her daughter has perfect pitch, which is a rare ability of a person to identify or recreate a given musical note without the benefit of a reference tone. As Dorothy grew older, Kira had no doubt that the vision of the girl who appeared to her a few years earlier was Dorothy, and decided it was time to discuss with Dorothy the young soul that had appeared to her one night wearing a plaid dress, shortly before she was born. Kira believed Dorothy was old enough to learn how to meditate, and after learning, Dorothy decided to practice for herself and believed she might be able to find out who the young girl was that appeared in front of her mother. Dorothy was a fast learner and had no doubt acquired her mother's spiritual abilities, and it was not long before she was able to obtain information as to the previous life of the young girl in her mother's vision. Every time Dorothy offered information about the past life, Kira kept meticulous notes, even though Kira felt that at this early stage of meditating, what she said may have been her daughter's vivid imagination. However, one particular day after Dorothy had been meditating, she offered information that appeared to be more than just a child's imagination. Dorothy said, "Mom, I know who I was in past life. Her name was Lizzie or Lily, but her real name was Alice Pons." Keeping in mind that Dorothy was only 6 years old and had just started kindergarten, she had not yet learned how to read or use a computer, so was certainly not able to do any research on past lives or people through the internet. Now intrigued, Kira decided to Google the name Lily Pons and found that she was an opera singer born in France in 1898 and went on to become famous and had an active career from the late 1920s through to the early 1970s. However, what convinced Kira that her daughter was telling the truth was that Lily's actual birth name was Alice. But before discussing this finding with Dorothy, she wanted her daughter to delve a bit deeper into this person. So she asked Dorothy whether she'd learned anything more about this past life. Dorothy then said, her husband's name was Cosliams, and they had many pets, and that Lily played the piano and loved to sing, and became a professional singer at 22. Dorothy also said that she had a music room in her house and loved nature, especially wild cats and bird singing. Later, Dorothy would complain of painful stomach aches, and she said she started to get them when they spoke about her past life. Dorothy said that it felt like a bad stomach from her past life and it made her sad. Then one night during one of her painful episodes said, "I know what Lily Pons died from, Mum. It was a bad stomach ache." Fortunately for Dorothy, after finding out how Lily died, it was the last stomach ache she had. Kira decided to do further research on Lily Pons and found that she'd passed from pancreatic cancer, which would have caused severe stomach pain. Kira was now totally convinced that her daughter was talking about her past life as Lily Pons. Now that Kira was certain about her daughter's past life, she decided to show Dorothy a photo of Lily Pons, where Dorothy exclaimed, "Hey, that's me! Now you've seen me with short hair, Mum." Further research showed that Alice Josephine Pons was born in France on April 12, 1898, and first studied piano at the Paris Conservatory, winning the first prize at the age of 15. She then went on to become an opera singer and actress who went by the professional name of Lily Pons. She then moved to New York City and performed in the Metropolitan Opera from 1931 to 1960. Lily even appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. Lily was married twice, where her second husband was the famous conductor Andrei Kostelanets. Alice Lily Pons died on February 13, 1976, at the age of 77, almost 35 years before Dorothy was born. Reincarnation is also known as rebirth or transmigration, and is the philosophical belief that the non-physical essence of a living being begins a new life in a different physical form or body after biological death. Many religions that believe in reincarnation consider it the path to purity and salvation. Over the years, Weird World has been covering many stories about reincarnation, where many of them are so convincing they would challenge even the most hardcore skeptics. Like our previous reincarnation stories, the following story is more amazing evidence and maybe further proof that reincarnation exists. In 2014, when Atlas Aubrey from Evansville, Indiana, was 1.5 years old, he started having terrible night terrors, where his eyes would be wide open as if he was in terrible pain. The young boy's disturbing dreams went on for many years, and his mother appeared unable to comfort him or help him in any way. She became so distressed and desperate that she sought professional help for her son, but nobody was able to come up with any rational answers for a child's behaviour. One day when Atlas was 5 years of age, he and his mother were driving in the car when Atlas suddenly said, "I miss when my mum used to play with me in the playground." His mother asked him, "You mean me?" And Atlas replied, "No, my other mum, with the really pretty hair." What happened next surprised his mother even more, when he said to her that his real name was Jalen Robinson and his mother's name was Washington. Alice's mother was shocked even further when he said, "When I was this child, someone took my life." The story had his mother extremely confused and baffled. And where did he come up with the name Jalen Robinson, believing that it must have been someone he knew at school? And why was he talking about this child called Jalen Robinson? His mother then decided to Google the child's name and found a story about a 90-month-old boy who had been slain by his babysitter in Brooklyn, New York in 2005, almost 10 years previously. Yet they lived in Evansville, Indiana. Erica was shocked to find the name Jalen Robinson, who had lost his life just the way her son had said. To go deeper into this tragedy and to give the story more credibility, we'll delve into the original incident that happened in 2005, as was reported in the media. Police reported that a babysitter had been charged with taking the life of a 90-month-old boy in Brooklyn. The mother of the child, Corinne Washington, said that 40-year-old Tammy Williams had been looking after Jalen Robinson for 1 week in her home while she and her husband worked, and at a future date had planned to place him in a nearby daycare centre. The mother said that she'd been in contact with the babysitter all week, where her son appeared to be doing fine. The police were called to Tammy Williams' home at 483 Lincoln Avenue in East New York a short time after midnight on Sunday, March the 6th, where they found Jalen Robinson unconscious. He was then taken to Brookdale University Hospital and Medical Centre, where a short time after being admitted was pronounced dead. Tammy Williams told Jalen's mother that she may have overdosed him with Tylenol, and then changed her story, saying he may have bumped his head. Corinne Washington said that Tammy Williams was her friend. "Why did she cover my son's mouth with duct tape?" Corinne Washington worked as a security guard in Brooklyn and was about to move from night shift to day shift. Tammy Williams, in the interim, was to look after Jalen for only 1 week. All parties believed that Tammy Williams may have suddenly snapped, and instead of asking her friend Corinne to pick up the child as she was stressed out, she cracked and took his life. Medical authorities concluded that the boy had not only been smothered but also otherwise abused. Tammy Williams was charged with second-degree murder. All neighbours were shocked, as she was seen as a mother on the block. Everybody wanted her to be the godmother to their baby. That's how nice she was. The above media reporting leaves no doubt that a child called Jalen Robinson had lost his life just as Atlas Aubrey had described to his mother, and he was also able to quickly name his mother with the surname Washington. Erica Aubrey was so convinced by his son's story that she contacted Dr. Jim Tucker, who was a child psychiatrist at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. One of Dr. Tucker's main research interests was documenting stories of children who claimed to remember previous lives, and have been researching the phenomena for 20 years. Tucker believes children are most likely to retain memories from past lives as they are not influenced by knowledge of the past. But as they get older, the memories of their previous lives usually fade. By the age of 6 or 7, the memories have gone. Both Erica and Atlas worked closely with Dr. Tucker, where he set him a series of tests. He then presented Atlas with 5 photos from Jalen Robinson's life, where one of them was a photo of Jalen's mother and father, their home, several of the places they would visit, and the playground that Jalen's mother had regularly taken him to. Keeping in mind that Atlas had to choose each image from a selection of other images, and got 5 out of 5 on each occasion. Dr. Tucker said that his mother could not have created or taught this behaviour to him. As with many reincarnation stories about children, the parents have never previously discussed reincarnation or shown photographs to their child. On most occasions, the child's previous life description was spontaneous without any prompting from friends or family. Dr. Tucker has written a book titled Life Before Life, a scientific investigation of children's memories of previous lives. The following are 2 amazing stories where a soul was able to send a message to their intended family by appearing in a dream or a vision, telling them they will be shortly arriving. The messages that they send to their future parents are called announcing dreams. Walter Miller, Michael Wright. In the 1960s, Walter Miller lived in a small town in Texas, and in high school he was dating a young woman by the name of Catherine. Walter liked to draw and paint, and would often do drawings for Catherine. By the late 60s, after being together for 3 years, they planned to get engaged and then marry. One evening in the summer of 1967, Walter and his friend Henry Sullivan had been to a dance in a neighbouring town and were driving home from the dance when Walter fell asleep at the wheel, wherein the car ran off the road and crashed. Walter passed immediately after breaking his neck, and Henry Sullivan was fortunate enough to survive with just a few scratches. Almost 1 year later, in June of 1968, Catherine married a young man by the name of Frederick Wright. Catherine had not been married very long when Walter started to appear in her dreams, telling her that he was not dead and would one day come back and draw pictures for her, as he'd previously done. Catherine believed the dream to be a genuine message from a late boyfriend, telling her that he would be reincarnating. Walter had a sister called Carol, and at the time of her dream was pregnant, so Catherine assumed that Walter would reincarnate as a child of Carol's, but that was not to be the case. A few years later, Catherine became pregnant with her first child and gave birth to a baby girl. Then in 1975, she had another child where she gave birth to a baby boy, who she named Michael. The thought that Walter could reincarnate as her son never entered her mind, until one day when Michael was only 3 years old, mentioned the name Carol Miller, who was Walter's sister. As if this was not enough of a message to shock Catherine, her son later gave a detailed account of the car accident that had cost Walter his life. Michael had told the story to a friend, where he told him that he was in a car with a friend that went off the side of the road, and then the car rolled over and over. He said he lost his life when his door flew open and was thrown out of the car. But that was not the last description that his son Michael would give after the car accident. We said that he remembered the glass in the car shattering, and also later remembered being carried over a bridge. Michael was also able to name the town that had been coming from after the dance before driving on the highway and having the accident. As if that was not enough proof that Walter had reincarnated as a son, Michael also mentioned that he and his friend had stopped at a restroom on their way home and said that his friend's name was Sullivan, and even correctly named what Henry Sullivan's nickname was. Michael was also able to tell them where Walter lived and where Henry Sullivan lived. Catherine knew that all of these facts were true, regarding Walter's accident, and Michael also described what happened after he died, where the ambulance that was taking Walter's body away to the morgue had crossed over a bridge, just as Michael had described. It appears obvious that after Walter had lost his life, he was able to observe his body being placed into the ambulance and being driven over the bridge, as he was now in spirit. It appears that Walter also had genuinely appeared in Catherine's dream, telling her he would be coming back, but he did not warn her that he would be coming back as her son. Blanche Bautista. In 1900, Signora Bautista and her husband Flanida lived in Rome, where Signora gave birth to a baby girl that they named Blanche. At the time, Signora's husband Flanida was a captain in the Italian army and had a Swiss servant named Mary, who could only speak French. When Blanche was 2 years of age and ready for bed, Mary would sing her a French lullaby, and Blanche eventually learned the lyrics to the song. Unfortunately, Blanche passed away in 1902 when she was only 2 years of age, and Mary then left the family and returned home to Switzerland, no doubt shattered by the sad event. 3 years later, and no doubt time had helped to heal some of her emotional wounds, Signora Bautista was pregnant again, and when she was just 3 months pregnant, Signora Bautista had a vision where she received a message that Blanche was returning to the family. It was August 1905, and at the time of the message, her husband Flanida was in the room with his wife when they were both lying in bed and fully awake. Suddenly, his wife told him that she'd seen a figure of their deceased daughter Blanche, and the vision showed a happy child that spoke to Signora and said to her, "Mama, I'm coming back," and then the figure disappeared. 6 months later, in February 1906, Signora gave birth to a baby girl, of which they again called Blanche, no doubt keeping the name of their deceased child. Why give a baby a new name when, as seen in a vision, believed the previous child was returning? The reborn Blanche had the same features as the old Blanche. If the parents needed any more proof that the deceased child returned, was when at the age of 5, the new Blanche started singing the French lullaby that had been taught to her by their former French servant Mary. Lullaby that Mary had taught the old Blanche had not been sung or heard for 9 years, and 5-year-old Blanche had not been around any French people or heard any French tunes in all of her 5 years. When her parents asked Blanche where she had learnt the French lullaby, their child responded by saying, "Nobody taught me, I just know it by myself," and then continued to sing the lullaby that Mary had taught her in a previous incarnation. The case of Blanche Bautista appears to show that people can reincarnate with the same family, and the absolute proof is when Blanche was able to sing a French lullaby that she had not been taught in a short 5 years, as the reborn Blanche and a physical resemblance was further proof that the child had transferred from one incarnation to another.